You'll sit in row 18 behind the catering staff, the coordinator said while my daughter-in-law smiled coldly. We can't have your situation embarrassing our family. My son looked away, silent. No defense, not a word. 35 years I raised that boy, and this is how it ends. I gripped my program watching him stand beside a woman who saw me as nothing. But when an elegant stranger slid into the seat next to me and whispered, "Let's pretend we came together," everything changed. She had no idea that the man sitting in the last row had spent decades protecting a truth that could destroy everything they thought they knew about family. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another voice standing up for dignity. And if this story hits close to home, don't forget to share it so others know they're not alone. You'll sit in row 18 behind the catering staff. The coordinator announced, her clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. My daughter-in-law Blair smiled, that cold practice smile I'd come to know so well. We can't have your situation embarrassing our family today. My son Drew looked away, studying his polished shoes as if they held the secrets of the universe. 35 years I'd raised that boy. 35 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and working double shifts to keep him fed and clothed. And this is how it ends, with silence. The Biltmore estate stretched around us like a monument to everything I wasn't. Manicured gardens, marble fountains, and guests dripping in diamonds and designer labels. I clutched my program tighter, the paper crinkling under my weathered hands. At 68, I thought I'd made peace with my place in the world. A retired high school janitor from Asheville living on Social Security, and the small savings Faith and I had scraped together before cancer took her 3 years ago. But standing here in my only good suit, the same navy blue one I'd worn to Faith's funeral, I felt smaller than I had in years. Row 18 it is, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. Blair's eyes flicked over me once more, cataloging my worn shoes, my outdated tie, the way my jacket hung a little loose, now that grief had stolen my appetite. Her mother, Joan, stood nearby, whispering to a woman in pearls, both of them glancing my way with barely concealed disdain. I made my way toward the back, past rows of Hunt family friends, past business associates in $1,000 suits, past people who belonged in this world of old money and older secrets. The irony wasn't lost on me, the father of the groom relegated to sitting behind the people hired to serve the cake. That's when she appeared. An elegant woman in a charcoal gray dress slipped into the seat beside me, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. She moved with the kind of quiet confidence that money can't buy, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. "Excuse me," I started to say, thinking she'd made a mistake. She turned to me with eyes the color of storm clouds and smiled. "Let's pretend we came together," she whispered, her voice carrying just enough authority to make the suggestion sound like fact rather than fiction. I stared at her, my heart doing something it hadn't done in years. Around us I could feel the shift, heads turning, whispers starting, the careful social calculations that happen when someone unexpected enters the equation. Blair's head snapped toward us, her composure cracking just slightly. Joan Hunt's conversation died mid-sentence. Even Drew glanced back, his face pale with something that might have been recognition or might have been fear. The woman beside me adjusted her designer handbag and smiled at the crowd like she owned the place. For all I knew, she did. "Who is that woman with the groom's father?" I heard someone whisper from 3 rows up. I didn't have an answer. But for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the world alone. The reception hall buzzed with controlled chaos as guests filtered toward cocktails and whispered conversations. I found myself walking beside this mysterious woman, through the estate's rose garden, away from prying eyes and calculating stares. "I'm Roy Barnes," I said, though something told me she already knew that. "Nora Ford." She paused by a marble fountain, the sound of water creating a natural barrier around our conversation. "And before you ask, no, this wasn't coincidence." My chest tightened. "I don't understand." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. The paper felt expensive between my fingers. "Nora Ford, Chief Executive Officer, Ford Capital Management." The address listed a building in downtown Charlotte I'd seen on the news. One of those glass towers that scraped the sky and housed the kind of money that moved mountains. "Ford Capital," I repeated slowly. Should that mean something to me? Her smile was gentle, but carried an edge I couldn't quite place. "We own the building where Hunt Luxury Properties has their headquarters. Have for about 6 months now." The words hit me like cold water. Hunt Luxury Properties. Blair's family business, the source of all their wealth and arrogance. The company that had built their empire on mountain real estate and old money connections. I started, then stopped. The implications were staggering. Their lease comes up for renewal next month. Nora continued, her voice matter of fact. Funny how these business relationships work. One day you're untouchable. The next day you're hoping someone returns your phone calls. I studied her face, looking for answers to questions I didn't know how to ask. Why are you telling me this? Because 30 years ago, a young woman named Faith Mitchell used to write me letters. The mention of my late wife's maiden name made my breath catch. She told me about her husband Roy, who worked 3 jobs to put their son through college, who never missed a parent-teacher conference even when he had to leave work early and lose pay. My eyes burned. Faith had never mentioned writing to anyone named Nora Ford. She also told me, Nora continued softly, that if anything ever happened to her, she worried about you being alone, about people not unseeing the good man she married. The fountain's gentle splash filled the silence between us. Around the garden's edge, I could see wedding guests through the windows toasting and laughing completely, unaware that the ground beneath the Hunt family's feet had just shifted. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing. She tucked the business card back into her purse. But what I want for you is respect, the kind you've earned but haven't been given. A group of guests wandered near the garden entrance, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Blair's voice cut through the sound, sharp with irritation as she spoke to someone about managing the family image. Nora's expression hardened slightly. Your daughter-in-law has very specific ideas about what makes someone worthy of respect. She's young, I said, though. The words felt hollow. She doesn't understand. She understands perfectly. Nora's voice was steel wrapped in silk. She understands that she can treat you poorly because she believes you have no power to respond. The truth of it settled in my chest like a stone. What if she's wrong about that? Nora asked. I looked back toward the reception hall, where Drew was probably making small talk with people who saw me as an embarrassment to be managed, where Blair was likely already planning how to minimize my presence at future family events. This isn't over, Roy, Nora said quietly. It's just beginning. 3 days after the wedding, I sat across from Nora at a corner table in Grove Park Inn's main dining room. The historic hotel perched on Asheville's mountainside like a castle, its stone walls and timber beams speaking of old-world elegance that even the Hunt family respected. The Mountain Business Association dinner is tomorrow night, Nora said, sliding a cream-colored invitation across the white tablecloth. Kent Hunt will be there. He's receiving some community leadership award. I picked up the invitation, feeling the weight of expensive paper between my fingers. And you think we should just show up? Not show up? She corrected with a slight smile. Make an entrance. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Nora had been invited as Ford Capital's CEO, a legitimate business presence that no one could question. I would be her guest, introduced simply as Roy Barnes, a dear friend. Nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational, just 2 people enjoying dinner and conversation. The beauty of it, Nora explained, is that we won't have to do anything at all. They'll do it to themselves. The next evening, within 20 minutes of our arrival at the Omni Grove Park Inn's ballroom, I watched the Hunt family's carefully constructed world begin to crack. Kent Hunt spotted us first during the cocktail hour. His face went through a series of expressions, confusion, recognition, then something approaching panic. He whispered urgently to his wife Joan, who turned to stare at our table with undisguised alarm. Blair appeared at their side moments later, her champagne glass trembling slightly in her manicured hand. Even from across the room, I could see her lips moving rapidly as she spoke to her parents, her designer dress unable to hide the tension in her shoulders. They're trying to figure out who you are, I murmured to Nora as we watched the family huddle. More importantly, they're trying to figure out what I want. Nora took a sip of her wine, completely at ease. And why I'm with you. The evening's program began, but I noticed Kent Hunt's acceptance speech lacked its usual confidence. His eyes kept finding our table, and twice he stumbled over words he'd probably practiced for weeks. When he mentioned the importance of treating all community members with respect, his gaze lingered on me just a beat too long. During the dinner break, Joan Hunt made her move. She approached our table with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes, her jewelry catching the ballroom's crystal chandelier light. Ms. Ford, isn't it? Joan's voice carried that particular southern sweetness that could cut glass. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Mrs. Hunt. Nora stood, gracefully extending her hand. I've heard so much about your family's business. Hunt Luxury Properties has quite a reputation." The words were perfectly polite, but something in Nora's tone made Joan's smile falter. And Roy Joan continued, turning to me with visible effort. "What a surprise to see you here." "Life is full of surprises," I replied evenly. Joan's laugh sounded forced. "Well, I hope you're both enjoying the evening, if you'll excuse me." She retreated to her family's table, where an urgent, whispered conversation immediately began. I watched Blair pull out her phone, typing rapidly. Drew sat silent, his face pale as he glanced between his wife and his in-laws. "They're scared," I observed. "They should be," Nora replied quietly. "They're finally realizing that the man they've been treating like an inconvenience might not be as powerless as they thought." Across the room, Kent Hunt was making a phone call, his back turned to the crowd, his free hand gesturing frantically. The Hunt family had just discovered they were in very dangerous territory. The doorbell rang at 8:15 Thursday morning, cutting through my kitchen's quiet. Joan Hunt stood on my porch, designer handbag clutched like armor against her cream coat. I had expected this visit since watching her family's panic at the business dinner. "Roy," her smile was practice-strained, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by." We both knew she'd never set foot in my working-class neighborhood before, where houses were small and driveways held pickup trucks instead of luxury cars. I let her in, watching her eyes catalog my modest living room. Faith's worn recliner family photos on the mantel, simple furniture that spoke of dignity over wealth. "Coffee," I offered. She perched on my couch's edge like she might catch something. "That's kind, thank you." I used Faith's good china, the set saved for special occasions that rarely came. Joan accepted the cup, but didn't drink. "I'll be direct," she began. "The other night you seemed quite friendly with Miss Ford. Nora's good company." Joan's laugh was brittle. "We wouldn't want business relationships to be misunderstood." She withdrew a folded check from her handbag, placing it on my coffee table. Cream paper, elegant script, Hunt Family Trust. I unfolded it. $80,000 and word 100. "Quite generous?" she continued smoothly. "Consider it goodwill. Home improvements, perhaps a vacation. You've worked so hard." 80,000. More money than I'd ever seen at once. Enough to fix my roof, replace my car, take that Ireland trip Faith had dreamed about. It was also Joan Hunt's price for my silence and dignity. "In return?" I asked quietly. Her mask slipped slightly. "We'd hate for professional connections to be misinterpreted. Miss Ford seems lovely, but sometimes these relationships create complications." I folded the check carefully, running my thumb along the crisp edge. Joan's face brightened with hope. Then I tore it in half. The sound cut through the quiet room. Joan went white as I tore again and again until $80,000 became confetti in my weathered hands. "My dignity is not for sale, Mrs. Hunt," I said, letting the pieces fall between us. "Not for 80,000, not for 80 million. Joan stared at the shredded check like she couldn't believe it. In her world, everything had a price. Everyone could be bought. She was learning otherwise. "You're making a mistake, Roy," she said, voice shaking as she stood. "Maybe," I replied, walking her to the door. "But it's my mistake to make." After she left, I swept up her check's remains and threw them away. Outside, her Mercedes pulled from my driveway with the urgency of retreat. I poured myself fresh coffee and sat in Faith's chair, looking at the family photos she'd arranged so carefully. Our wedding picture, Drew's graduation holidays when we'd been happy and whole. Faith had always said that once you sell your principles, you can never buy them back. She'd been right about most things, my wife. This wouldn't be an exception. Through the window, I watched Joan's taillights disappear around the corner. She'd returned to her mansion, to Kent and Blair, to a family meeting where they'd realized their usual methods had failed. Money couldn't solve this problem. Influence couldn't make it disappear. For the first time in their privileged lives, the Hunts faced someone who couldn't be purchased. The Hunt family had just run out of options. The law offices of Park & Associates occupied the 20th floor of a glass tower in downtown Charlotte, with views that stretched across the Carolina Piedmont like a promise of power. I'd never been in a lawyer's office before, let alone one that charged more per hour than I used to make in a month. Lara Park was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of confidence that came from winning battles others wouldn't dare fight. Her handshake was firm, professional, and somehow reassuring. "Mr. Barnes, Miss Ford." She gestured to the leather chairs across from her mahogany desk. "I've reviewed the preliminary information Nora provided. This is quite an interesting situation." Nora leaned forward slightly. "Interesting enough to pursue." "Oh, absolutely." Lara's smile was predatory in the best possible way. Hunt Luxury Properties is more vulnerable than they realize. Their lease with Ford Capital expires in 18 days, and the renewal terms are entirely at your discretion. She opened a thick file folder, spreading documents across her desk, like a general planning a campaign. Here's what we're proposing. The contract was elegant in its simplicity. New lease terms, higher rent, shorter duration, all standard business practice. But buried in the fine print were the clauses that would change everything. It was Section 12, requires a public acknowledgement of past conduct. Lara explained, pointing to a paragraph dense with legal language, specifically a formal apology for disrespectful treatment of family members. How public? I asked. The Asheville Community Foundation Gala is next weekend. 500 guests, local media coverage, live streaming for donors who can't attend. Lara's eyes gleamed. Perfect venue for corporate social responsibility announcements. I felt something shift in my chest. Not revenge exactly, but justice. The same people who'd whispered about me at Drew's wedding would witness my vindication. There's more, Nora added. The Faith Barnes Memorial Scholarship Fund administered through Ford Capital. Annual contribution of $50,000 for 10 years. My breath caught. Faith's name honored publicly helping students who needed it most. She would have loved that. And if they refuse, I managed to ask. Lara's expression hardened. Immediate lease termination. They'd have 30 days to vacate the premises, relocate their entire operation, and explain to their clients why their business address suddenly changed. She pulled out another document, this one shorter, but somehow more ominous. The relocation costs alone would exceed $200,000. Lost clients, interrupted contracts, damaged reputation. We're looking at potential losses in the millions. They'll fight it, I said. Let them try. Lara gathered the papers with practiced efficiency. Everything we're requesting is legal, ethical, and tied to legitimate business concerns. They treated you poorly because they thought you had no power to respond. Time to prove them wrong. Nora reached across the desk, her hand briefly covering mine. You sure about this, Roy? I thought about Faith, about the years of working double shifts to give Drew opportunities the Hunt family took for granted, about sitting in row 18 while Blair smiled her cold smile, about Joan's check torn into pieces and thrown away like the insult it was. I'm sure. Lara sealed the documents in a formal legal envelope, the kind that made people's hands shake when they opened their mail. I'll have this delivered to Kent Hunt's office by messenger this afternoon. Certified signature required. How long do they have? I asked. 72 hours from receipt to respond in writing. Lara's voice was crisp, final. Business doesn't wait for family drama to resolve itself. She stood, extending her hand again. Mr. Barnes, it's been a pleasure. I have a feeling this case will be quite satisfying to conclude. As we left the building, stepping into Charlotte's afternoon sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because of the money or the power, but because someone had finally heard my worth and decided to defend it. 72 hours, Nora said as we reached her car. 72 hours, I agreed. The Hunt family had exactly 3 days to decide whether their pride was worth losing everything. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Sunday night, 13 minutes before the 72-hour deadline expired. I'd been watching the mantel clock tick toward midnight. Roy Barnes speaking. Mr. Barnes. Kent Hunt's voice sounded dragged across gravel. This is Kent Hunt. I let silence stretch between us like a taut wire. We accept your terms. 4 words that cost him everything he thought he was. I pictured him in his mahogany study admitting defeat to a retired janitor. All of them, I asked quietly. All of them. The public apology, the scholarship fund, the new lease terms, everything. And Blair understands what's expected. A pause. She's working on her statement now. The gala is Saturday night, 7 o'clock. We'll be there. Kent's voice cracked. Roy, I want you to know... Save it for Saturday, Kent? I hung up and called Nora immediately. They accepted, I said. I know. Lara just texted the signed documents. I heard her smile. How do you feel? I looked around my small living room at the life Faith and I built with love instead of money, like justice. The next few days blurred with preparation. Tuesday afternoon, Drew called, voice tight with desperation. Dad, please. Can't we work this out privately? Blair's been crying for 2 days. She should have thought about that before row 18. She was trying to impress her family. You know how her mother can be. I know exactly how her mother can be. I have the torn check to prove it. Drew's sharp breath told me he hadn't known about Joan's bribe attempt. Dad, I'm asking as your son. Please don't do this. The words hit hard. For 35 years, I'd put him first. Worked extra shifts, missed sleep, sacrificed comfort so he could have better. Now he asked me to sacrifice my dignity too. Drew, I said softly, for 35 years I put you first. I never asked for much in return, just respect. You have my respect. Do I? When Blair called me an embarrassment, where was it? When your in-laws treated me like hired help, where was it? When they seated me behind the catering staff, where was your respect? Silence stretched between us, filled with years of complicated love. Saturday night, your wife will apologize publicly, I continued. Not because I'm cruel, but because actions have consequences. Maybe it's time you both learned that. And if we don't show up, then you'll learn what it feels like to lose everything that matters. I hung up and sat in the growing dusk, watching shadows lengthen across my yard. The house felt different now, not empty, but expectant, like it was holding its breath for what came next. Faith's photo smiled at me from the mantel, and I could almost hear her voice. Sometimes, the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing, Roy. She'd been right about most everything, my wife. This wouldn't be an exception. I thought about the scholarship that would bear her name, about the students who'd benefit from Blair's public humiliation, about the lesson Drew was finally going to learn about treating people with dignity. Tomorrow night, everything would change. The Asheville Community Foundation Gala transformed the Grove Park Inn ballroom into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over 500 guests in evening wear their jewelry, catching the glow as they sipped champagne and discussed their charitable contributions. I stood near the back in my best suit, the same navy one from Drew's wedding, but somehow it felt different tonight. Nora beside me wore elegant black, her silver hair swept up, looking every inch the successful CEO she was. Ladies and gentlemen, the Master of Ceremonies announced, we have a special presentation this evening from Hunt Luxury Properties. The crowd quieted as Kent Hunt approached the podium, his face pale under the stage lights. Blair followed her designer gown, unable to hide the tremor in her hands. Drew walked behind them, his shoulders hunched like a man heading to his execution. Good evening, Kent began, his usually commanding voice barely above a whisper. My family would like to address a matter of personal conduct. Blair stepped forward, her prepared statement shaking in her grip. The room was so quiet I could hear the rustle of paper. My name is Blair Hunt, she began, her voice thin but carrying in the silence. 3 weeks ago at my wedding, I made inexcusable comments about my father-in-law's financial situation. I seated him in the back row behind the catering staff because I was ashamed of what I perceived as his poverty. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phone cameras appeared, capturing every word. I was wrong, Blair continued, tears beginning to flow. I was cruel and I was small. Roy Barnes raised an incredible son with love, sacrifice, and dignity. He deserved honor at our wedding, not humiliation. The applause that followed was polite but uncomfortable. This wasn't entertainment. It was witnessing someone's public reckoning. We are also announcing, Kent added, his voice stronger now, the establishment of the Faith Barnes Memorial Scholarship, funded by our family, to honor the memory of Roy's late wife and support students in need. More applause, warmer this time. I felt Nora's hand slip into mine. Then something shifted inside me. Maybe it was seeing Drew's face twisted with shame and something deeper. Maybe it was thinking about Faith, about the secret we'd carried together. Maybe it was knowing that this moment would define how my story ended. I stood up. If I may, I called out, my voice carrying across the ballroom. All heads turned. The Master of Ceremonies looked confused, but handed me the microphone as I walked to the front. Thank you, Blair, I said, looking directly at my daughter-in-law. Your apology means more than you know. I turned to face the crowd, 500 faces staring back at me in the golden light. But there's something else you all should understand about family, about love, about what really matters. I took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in my soul. 35 years ago, I learned that Drew wasn't my biological son. The silence was absolute. Not a glass clinked, not a chair creaked. My wife Faith had been unfaithful early in our marriage. When Drew was born, a simple blood test would have told me the truth. But I never took that test because it didn't matter. He was my son from the moment I held him. Drew's face went white. Blair's mouth fell open. In the crowd, I saw people leaning forward, hanging on every word. I changed his diapers. I walked the floor with him when he had colic. I taught him to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to treat people with respect. My voice grew stronger. Biology doesn't make a father. Love does. Choice does. Showing up every day does. I looked directly at Drew, this young man I'd raised as my own. So when people ask me about family, about what we owe each other, I tell them this love isn't about blood. It's about commitment. It's about choosing to see the best in someone even when they disappoint you. The room erupted. Cameras flashed, people gasped, and somewhere in the crowd someone started clapping. Then more joined in until the entire ballroom thundered with applause. Drew was crying now, his face in his hands. Blair stared at me like she'd never seen me before. The truth was finally free. The hotel's garden terrace was empty except for us, mountain air cool as Asheville's lights twinkled below. Drew sat on a stone bench, head in hands, shoulders shaking. Blair stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. I'd followed them out after the gala ended, leaving behind 500 people processing what they'd witnessed. Drew, I said softly, settling beside him. He looked up with red eyes, and I saw the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees. Why didn't you ever tell me? His voice was broken. I pulled out a photo I'd carried 35 years. Drew at 3 chocolate ice cream on his grin, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair. Because it never mattered, I said simply. Look at this picture. Do you see a man pretending to love someone else's child? Drew took the photo with trembling fingers. I see a father and his son, he said quietly. That's all I ever saw, too. I put my arm around his shoulders. Drew, I chose to be your father every single day. When you had nightmares, when you broke your arm, when you graduated, every moment I chose you. But Mom, your mother made a mistake when she was young and scared. But she spent her life being the best wife and mother she could be. We chose love over pride, son. We chose family. Blair moved closer, voice small. I'm so sorry, Roy. I had no idea what kind of man you really are. Blair, you're young. You'll make mistakes. We all do. What matters is what you learn. I paused. I'm not asking you to love me like a father. Just see me as a person who deserves basic respect. She nodded through her tears. Drew leaned against me like when he was 10, and the world felt too big. I don't know how to make up for what I let happen. You don't have to make up for anything. Just remember that love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up when things get hard. We sat in comfortable silence, 3 imperfect people figuring out how to be family again. What happens now? Drew asked. I thought about Faith, about the scholarship bearing her name, about Nora, waiting inside with plans for a future I'd never dared imagine. Now we choose to do better, I said. All of us. Drew straightened, wiping his eyes. For the first time in years, he looked like the man I'd raised him to be. I love you, Dad, he said, and Dad had never sounded sweeter. I love you too, son. I always have. I always will. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. And sitting under Carolina stars, I knew our family was finally whole again. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the new Faith Barnes Community Center watching teenagers from East Asheville work on their college applications. The building wasn't fancy, just a converted warehouse with good lighting and hope painted on the walls, but it hummed with the kind of energy that changes lives. The first scholarship recipients are incredible, Nora said, joining me with 2 cups of coffee. She'd been coming to Asheville every weekend, and somewhere between planning the center and watching sunsets from my back porch, we'd found our way back to each other after 50 years. Faith would have loved this, I said, watching a young girl practice her interview skills with one of our volunteer counselors. She always said education was the one thing nobody could take away from you. The Faith Barnes Memorial Scholarship had grown beyond anything we'd imagined. What started as Blair's public penance had become a movement. Local businesses contributed, other families shared their stories, and suddenly we had funding for 20 students each year instead of 5. So, speaking of faith, Nora smiled, pulling an envelope from her purse. The first thank you letter. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat, careful. Dear Mr. Barnes, my name is Maria Santos. I'm the first person in my family to go to college thanks to the Faith Barnes Scholarship. My parents clean offices at night to support us, and I used to be ashamed when kids at school found out. But your story taught me that dignity isn't about what job you have. It's about how you treat people and how you let them treat you. Thank you for showing me that respect is something you give yourself first. Maria. I had to sit down. After all these months, stories like Maria's still hit me like lightning. You know what the best part is? Nora asked, settling beside me on the lobby's worn couch. What's that? Drew called yesterday. He and Blair want to volunteer here on weekends. She specifically asked to help with interview prep. Said she wants to teach kids about treating everyone with respect, regardless of their background. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd once been ashamed of my situation now wanted to help other young people avoid her mistakes. People can change, I said. The right people can, Nora corrected gently. The ones who choose growth over pride. Through the center's windows, I could see the Blue Ridge Mountains, stretching toward forever. The same peaks Faith and I used to admire from our little back porch. She'd been gone 4 years now, but her influence rippled outward, through every student we helped. Every family that learned dignity couldn't be purchased or taken away. Roy, Nora said softly, I have something to ask you. I turned to find her holding a small velvet box. 50 years ago, I let fear and other people's opinions separate us, she said. I won't make that mistake twice. Will you marry me? I stared at her, this remarkable woman who'd helped me reclaim my worth when I'd almost forgotten I had any. Yes, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. As we sat there planning our future, I thought about the journey that had brought us here, from row 18 at Drew's wedding to this moment of pure possibility. If you're listening to this story, maybe you recognize something in it. Maybe you've been pushed to the back row of your own life. Maybe someone has tried to convince you that your worth depends on your bank account, your job title, or your address. Let me tell you something I learned at 68 years old. Your dignity belongs to you. Nobody can take it unless you hand it over. Stand up, speak up, know your worth, and remember, the people who truly matter will see your value regardless of what you own. The rest, well, they're not your people anyway. Looking back, I spent too many years accepting less than I deserved. Don't be like me. Don't wait until you're 68 to stand up for your dignity. Don't let others define your worth by your bank account. God gave each of us inherent value that no human can diminish. When Blair seated me in row 18, I almost forgot that truth. But the Lord works in mysterious ways. He brought Nora back at exactly the right moment to remind me who I am. The lesson I learned, respect, isn't something you earn through wealth. It's something you claim by knowing your worth and refusing anything less. When someone treats you poorly, that reflects their character, not yours. These grandpa stories aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that every person has dignity worth defending. This true story taught me that love makes family, not blood. Whether you're 18 or 80, it's never too late to choose respect over convenience. God doesn't measure us by possessions or positions. He measures us by how we treat others and how we allow ourselves to be treated. I'm grateful He gave me strength to finally stand up. My true story became redemption because I stopped accepting crumbs and demanded respect. These grandpa stories remind us that age brings wisdom, but wisdom without action is just regret. Don't wait for someone else to validate your worth. Don't let pride keep you from relationships that matter. This true story changed everything for my family, and sharing these grandpa stories can change lives too. If this story touched your heart, share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up for your dignity? Share this video with someone who needs to remember their worth. And subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us we're never too old to rewrite our ending. Your story matters, your dignity matters, and it's never too late to claim both.